So I was a bit intimidated to become the father of two sons. I guess there's a 1 in 4 chance when you have two children that they would be two boys, and that for some reason that wasn't what I was expecting. I have a 2-year-old son, Matthew, a 3-year-old now, and a 10-month-old son, James. And probably part of the reason for that, a big part of the reason for that, was because growing up I had one sibling younger than me, 2 years younger than me, and another 9 years younger, and it was but the closest in age was my sister. So growing up with a younger sister, there was some sense of rivalry and a little bit of competition, picking back and forth at each other. But when it's a sister, having a little sister, she could hit me, I couldn't hit back. Or at least that's kind of the way that it seemed to be going, she being younger than me as well. So with two boys, it's no holds barred. There's we're already starting to see a little bit of that already. And also in the Bible, the examples of two sons, of brothers, it's not that great. Going back from the very beginning part of the Bible, the two sons, brothers, their relationship is not exactly portrayed as being the best of relationships. And at least in the stories of the Bible, a lot of that has to do with poor parental management of conflict. And so I feel a little bit of pressure in that regard in raising two boys. And if you're a parent, I think all would agree there's a pressure that's associated with parenting. There's a pressure to try to please your children. You want to please them. You want them to be happy. And that desire to please can lead to healthy choices for them, or it can lead to unhealthy choices for them. But you don't have to be a parent to experience that pressure to please. If you're a child, you can feel the pressure to please your parents. I think everybody feels that maybe to some extent or not. But I felt that growing up, desire to please my parents. Sometimes that pressure to please can lead to working harder, pushing ourselves more. Sometimes it can lead to a feeling of exasperation to kind of say, well, I'm done, and rebelling against parents. But growing up as the son of my father, I grew up in a small town, and my dad, it was the same town that my parents were from, and also that their parents were from. And so I grew up in a small, I went to the same high school that my dad went to, like 25 years before I was there. And I went to the same college that my dad went to, also in a small town, studied in the same major that my dad did. So I had I'd run into people all the time who knew my parents, or that my parents knew. They were acquaintances. And every time I would meet them, or maybe I had a class with somebody who was one of my dad's friends in college, who was a professor, and Dad would say, tell them who you are. Tell them who you are. And when he told me that, he didn't mean for me to tell them my name and my social security number and where I was born, all that kind of stuff. He meant to tell them, you are my son. Because whether we admit it or not, all of us are some reflection on our parents. Well, if there were ever two sons who didn't reflect the spirit of their father, it was the two sons in the prodigal son story in Luke chapter 15, the parable that Jesus tells. The younger son, an incredibly disrespectful request, asks his father in Luke chapter 15, verse 12. He says to his father, give me my share of the estate. In other words, you won't die quick enough. I want what's coming to me. And so his father incredibly divides his property. He gives the younger son his third that he would be entitled to. The older son got a double portion, and the younger son promptly went off and wasted everything that his father had given him. The Bible says, the text says, on wild living, prodigal living, another way to describe it, sinful living, ungodly activity. Incredibly disrespectful behavior by the younger son. But then the younger son gets to a place of need, and he decides to come back. He spends everything that his father gives him, and he comes back home, and he's going to plead and beg for his father's forgiveness. His father sees him coming. He runs to greet him. He hugs him. He embraces him. He restores him, which promptly makes the elder son, the one who stayed home, the one who worked, the one who was by his father's side, the one who was faithful, it makes him angry. And he's not angry because he doubts his brother's sincerity. In fact, the father throws a party for the younger brother in his return, and the elder brother refuses to participate. He refuses to go in when he hears about this. But his reason isn't for concern that his younger brother isn't genuinely remorseful. He says in verse 29, he says to his father, "Look," which was a very disrespectful way to speak to his elderly father. "Look, all these years I've been slaving for you, never disobeyed your orders. You never even slaughtered a young goat so we could have a party with my friends," which they had a fattened calf, which they had just slaughtered that to party for the younger brother's return. And so the older brother, he's upset, but he's not upset about the younger brother, his well-being, what the father's done. He's concerned about what the father's done, but it's all about what the father would give him, that he didn't get what was coming to him. He felt like he was basically gypped, that he didn't get what was coming to him. So both the younger brother and the older brother, their concern isn't for their father. Their concern is for the father's stuff. What can the father give them? How can I use what the father's given me for what I want to do? So both the younger brother and the elder brother, the younger son and the older son, both disrespect their father and disregard their father. But the main character in this parable, the hero of the story, isn't the younger brother, the one who comes home, even though the parable is named for him, the prodigal son. And it's not the elder brother, the one who's been faithful, working by his father's side, the one who probably identified more with Jesus' audience, the one to whom Jesus was speaking when he told this parable, which was the religious people, the Pharisees, the teachers of the law, who were upset with Jesus because of the company that he was keeping, the table fellowship he was sharing with the tax collectors and sinners. No, it wasn't either one of those. The hero of the story, the main character of the story, is the Father. The Father is the hero of the story. In fact, Jesus tells us this parable not to tell us something about the younger son or the older son. Jesus tells this parable to illustrate, to give us a depiction in story format. And that's the beauty of a parable, the beauty of the story. Tells us this parable to illustrate his Father's heart. The heart of God. Because through life, and it seems that some of those who are listening and those who are criticizing Jesus, they have different conceptions of God. And a lot of times those conceptions are shaped by our parents and our fathers especially. Some of those are improper perceptions. Some of us perceive God as easily angered. Someone who can't wait to punish us. Who's just looking for a chance to get on our case, okay? That's not the Father revealed in this parable, in Jesus' ministry, and really in all the Bible. Even though you might read certain parts, you might think differently. No, that's not the Father that Jesus reveals to us. The Father in this parable, the God revealed in this parable, the heart of God revealed in this parable. In this parable, we see a God who speeds to the penitent and who pleads with the indignant. Not to say that God never gets angry about things. In fact, we see that is true, that God does. And sometimes he gets angry with us. But the heart of God revealed in this parable is a God who speeds to the penitent. In other words, the repentant. Those who are sorry. Those who are remorseful. Those who come home from their sinful lifestyle. Those who turn away from their sins and turn to God. God's not waiting. God's not testing them. God runs to them. This Father runs and restores the penitent. We see a God who speeds to the penitent and pleads with the indignant. Those who are angry. Those who have some of that self-righteous anger. I've been working. I've been slaving. What haven't been done for me? What's coming to me? The elder brother doesn't participate in the party, but the father doesn't shut him out. He goes outside to plead with that elder brother. We see a God who speeds to the penitent and pleads with the indignant. Now, as I've preached through this parable the last 2 weeks, talking about the elder son last week and the younger son the week before that, I've had people to come up to me and say, times of my life, I identified more with the elder brother, and sometimes I identify with the younger brother. In different seasons of my life, I've been both brothers. And I think that's true. We can see ourselves in both brothers. I know in times of my life, I identified more with the younger brother, especially early in my Christian journey and before I became a Christian. And now I identify with the elder brother. Sometimes we're the penitent. Sometimes we're the indignant, okay? And sometimes it's not just seasons in our life that we're different ones of these. Sometimes it's a matter of which day, okay? Some days we're the penitent. Some days we're the indignant. What we see in this story, in these two sons, in these two brothers, really is embodied more than just me and you and our journeys in different seasons of our lives. But we see all of the human race, all of humanity represented in these two brothers. For all of those who are seeking fulfillment outside of God. Some seek fulfillment outside of God through license, through licentious living, through breaking laws, through pursuing pleasure. Whatever I want to do, I do it. And some seek fulfillment again outside of God, so though it might seem hard to them to believe, but it's through legalism. Again, they're outside of God's grace, trying to justify themselves, trying to be good enough, trying to stand out from everybody else. All the human race is represented in these two brothers. And that's why for centuries, this story, this parable has been so powerful, and it's been depicted in stories, in books, in works of art for centuries, literally since Jesus told this story almost 2,000 years ago. And the most famous depiction of this story in art, the most well-known, some say it's the most well-known painting in the world, is this one. It's Rembrandt's painting, The Return of the Prodigal Son, which Rembrandt, some have said, is the greatest visual artist of all time. Painting. He was a Dutchman, lived in the 1600s, painted this in 1669. Next year it'll be 350 years ago. Today it hangs in a gallery in St. Petersburg in Russia. And you can see in this painting that called The Return of the Prodigal Son that Rembrandt has depicted the parable. Now, this is not an actual scene in the story, okay? We know that when the younger son comes home and is embraced by his father, that the elder brother is not standing there watching, okay? He's actually out in the field working. It tells us this is what he's doing when the younger brother comes home. But you can imagine this, right? You can imagine this. You can picture this depiction of the parable. Now, I want us to look at this painting, okay? I want us to look more closely. All right, when I was in seminary about 15, 16 years ago, in one of my spiritual formation classes, the professor put up the painting on a projector, and he said, I just want you just to look at this painting and we stared at it for 30 minutes, This is before the days of iPhones, which are, I think this is a good time for a nap, Just to stare at the painting, but afterwards, as we talked about it, and my classmates shared what they had seen, the power of this image truly came out. I want you to look at this younger son, okay? I want you to look at what he's wearing. You can see it on the TV screen or maybe up on the screen there if you can't see well here. But look at this younger son, okay? Look at what he's wearing, okay? He's dressed in rags. There's dirt all over the bottom, mud on the bottom of his garment. He's got one sandal that's come off, one that's practically worn off. And one thing we know about Rembrandt is that we know that he personally identified with the prodigal son, with the younger son. In fact, earlier in his life, about 30 years before he painted this, he painted a painting that was entitled, that he called The Prodigal Son in the Tavern. And it's the guy in the tavern, which actually is said to be a self-portrait of Rembrandt in a tavern. He's got his drink, and he's got his arm around a lady, and his hands in more kind of a suggestive place. I mean, he was living the prodigal life. But this painting, he painted in 1669, which happened to be the year that he died. And it's believed that this painting, in Rembrandt's painting, he was painting his own return home. His homecoming. His return to his father, because he was about to experience his homegoing. One thing about that prodigal son in the tavern painting is there he is. You can see his smile, his face brazen. But here you can't even see the younger son's face. It's buried in the embrace of his father. Now, Rembrandt and his mastery of art, the light in this painting, ultimately, while maybe he identified with the younger son, the focus of the painting is the father. You see the light on the father's face? The father is the center of the painting. I want you to look at his face. Look at the father's face. Look at his eyes. You see that they're almost fully closed. Okay, this father is almost blind. And you can see the sorrow, okay? Can you see the sorrow on his face? There's perhaps relief of receiving his son home, but there's years of the wear of the anxiety of that father for his son. It shows on his aged face. You see his regality. He's wearing this fine robe that goes down to his feet, over his shoulders. But you also see that he's stooped over. He's hunched over. He's stooped over, perhaps out of age, but also to embrace his son. And look at his hands. Now, this is something that I probably wouldn't have noticed if someone hadn't pointed it out to me. But the light of the painting draws us to the hands. And look at those hands. The hand on your right, which is actually his left hand, they look different. His left hand, it looks more muscular, okay? It looks bigger, stronger, more masculine, maybe you could say. You could even see that it's gripping the clothing on the shoulder of the younger brother. Whereas his right hand, interesting that it's his right hand, which is typically that identifies the place of power, the right hand is more refined. It's more slender. In fact, we could maybe even say it's more feminine, more motherly. He's got the security, the strength of the grip of a father, but also the tenderness of a mother. Some wonder, where's the mother in the prodigal son story? We see it here. The father embodies both He is father and mother to these sons. Now, this is a different kind of message, maybe if you haven't noticed already. Usually we don't spend a lot of time staring at 350-year-old paintings, okay? But I want you to do, we're going to just get a little weirder here for a second, all right? Just play along with me. So what I want you to do just for the next few moments. I want you to kind of focus in, not on me, on this painting. Particularly on this embrace. And I want you to imagine that this father, your father, is embracing you. Just like he's embracing this lost younger brother who's come home. Don't think about the person sitting next to you. Don't just shut them out of your mind. Maybe even after you look, you might even want to close your eye. I don't know. But just imagine what it would feel like to be this younger brother and to be held securely and tenderly by your father. Because you see, the center of this story, the center of the parable, I could even say the center of Jesus' ministry, the center of the Gospel of Luke, the center of the Bible in its entirety, is the embrace of the Father and receiving His lost sons and daughters back home. The embrace of the Father. It's what the younger son found. And it's what the elder son missed out on. He missed it. How is that possible? How did that happen? Let's zoom out a minute and see that elder son standing, looking on. You see his head is down a little bit, his chin is down. It's a little bit of a dejected state. Perhaps he's looking down at what's happening. There's no smile on his face. For some of us, for some of you, when it comes to this painting, it's so hard to imagine yourself in this place. To imagine that embrace of your Father, that's just, you can't go there. You just can't imagine it. Let me ask this question. Do you think that this father would embrace his elder son just as he is embracing his younger son? Do you think that he would? Absolutely he would. Absolutely he would. Then why is the elder brother missing out? Why is he missing out on the Father's embrace? It's because he won't let him. He won't let him embrace him. He won't let him love him. Why do the elder brothers miss out? Well, it's because I'm not worthy. I'm not worthy to be loved. If they just knew who I really was. If he knows what an imposter I am. He knows I'm unclean. He knows I'm a failure. He knows I'm a fraud. And so all of our lives, we try to make ourselves worthy to be loved. Then I'll feel worthy to be loved. Well, maybe, just posit this, okay? Maybe the reason you don't feel the love of your Heavenly Father, the reason you're not experiencing that love, is because you won't let Him love you. Maybe loving God is allowing God to love us. It begins with simply accepting that I am worthy to be loved, not by anything that I've done, that I have to prove myself, but that my Father loves me, allowing Him to love me. Because all of that striving, all of that achieving, all of that competing, all of that having to be better, to have to prove myself, to have to be worthy, really what it's all covering up is low self-esteem. It's because I feel so insecure. And look, He's loving the younger son. He doesn't care about me. When nothing further could be from the truth. Nothing could be further from the truth. See, for all of us elder brothers, for all of us who want to achieve, who want to win, just think about this. For all of that motivation to try to be worthy and to try to make ourselves acceptable. If that pressure to please, that desire to please, if that motivates us, how much more motivated will we be with the security of knowing we are loved? If pressure to please motivates us, how much more the security of knowing we are loved? Well, the father in this story isn't just the hero of the story. He's also the role model. Whether you're the younger son or daughter or the older son or daughter, with whom you identify with more, you are the son or the daughter of your father. That's who you are. Tell him who you are. You are his child. And therefore, who you are is a reflection of who he is. To be loved by the Father and to begin to be loved by the Father is to begin to love like the Father. To return home, to return to the Father, is to become like the Father. To be loved by the Father is to love as the Father loves. And how does the Father love? How does he love in this story, in this parable? We see a love that perseveres. It's a love that loves in spite of. In the spite of the fact I've been spit in the face by both of my sons, in spite of the fact that I've been rejected, that they don't want me, they just want what I can give them, in spite of rejection, in spite of insults, in spite of humiliation, in spite of being effectively slapped in the face, the Father keeps on loving. I mean, isn't that what Jesus said would make us most like our Father? Not just loving those who love you, to love your enemies. He says it in Matthew chapter 5. To those who persecute and spitefully use you, because your Father pours blessings on the good and the bad. Just like he keeps on loving us. To love like the Father is to keep on loving you. Because it's the only thing He wants to do. He don't want to sleep. No, okay. Yeah. Some of you are like, young people are like, well, who is that? REO Speedwagon a few years ago. How come? How are we able to love like the Father loves? Well, in verse 31 of Luke 15, the Father says to the older son, "My son," the Father said, "you are always with me. You've never left. You're always with me. I'm not leaving you. You're always with me, and everything I have is yours. You haven't been denied anything. Returning home, receiving the younger brother, you're not left out of the party. The younger brother being restored is no threat to you. There's nothing that he has that you won't have. Everything I have is yours." So, the question is, ultimately, when you get down to it, our invitation is to love like our Heavenly Father loves, to love people for who they are, not what they can do for us, not out of any insecurity in us. It doesn't mean accepting what they do is right, just like the Father didn't accept all that His sons had done were right, but He kept on loving them. But the question for us, the place to begin, quote Henry Nouwen, the question for us is not, how am I to love God? The question for us today is, how am I to let myself be loved by God? Can you accept that you are worth loving? That your Father loves you? The message of Jesus and the depiction of Jesus on the cross, the death and the resurrection of Jesus, seals the answer forever. Yes. Yes, you are worthy to be loved. So let Him love you.